The House Human Services, Finance, and Policy Committee is called to order. We have a quorum, and Representative Fischer moves to approve the minutes from February 19th, 2025. Are there any additions, corrections, or changes to be made to the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor of the minutes signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. The minutes are approved for February 19th, 2025. The first bill we have up today is House File 1. And Representative Anderson can make her way to the testifier table, and I will move that House File 1 be re-referred to the Committee on Education Finance. And Representative Anderson, I believe you want to have the discussion today based on the DE2 amendment. So I will move the DE2 amendment to have that before us for the discussion today. Representative Anderson, welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record when you're ready and present your bill.
Thank you, Chair Schumacher. I'm Representative Patty Anderson from sort of Northwest Washington County. And thank you for having me and members of the committee. We're here to discuss House File 1. This is the bill that creates the Office of Inspector General within essentially the legislative branch. I'll give you a little bit of history, and then maybe we can have a good discussion. The bill creates this office within the legislative to sort of parallel what exists now with the legislative auditor. So we have the legislative auditor who is appointed, who's independent, who oversees essentially the financial audits of the executive branch in the state of Minnesota. This Office of Inspector General would sort of be side by side, not overlapping duties, but side by side, where they also oversee some of the issues in regards to investigations, waste, fraud, abuse, etc. I do want to note that in this DE, there was a good discussion that we've been having for the last couple weeks and had in the last committee about the definition of waste. What is waste? What is abuse? And the language here now is called misuse. So we did make that change, and we made a lot of changes along the way. The OIG is not, this whole issue of fraud in Minnesota, which is now approaching $1 billion and growing, is not a partisan issue. This is something that we're all extremely concerned about within our agencies. Those of you that are on this committee, I suspect, are here because you care about providing services for those in need. That's what we do. We create programs, you fund those programs, and then you turn them over to the administration in the hopes that they will execute those programs and carry them out. And so when we find that a lot of those dollars that were supposed to go to needy Minnesotans are instead going to fraudsters, that affects all of us and angers all of us. And we need to make changes so that that stops and doesn't happen again. I want to note, we've been working with both caucuses, and Representative Norris, thank you for joining us on Tuesday and for all of your input into this bill and continued input as it gets fine-tuned. But we've been meeting with the Senate. There's a bipartisan file there. I don't have the bill number, but Senator Gustafson is the lead author on that. So we've been meeting regularly, and we'll be meeting again, I can tell you, next Tuesday as the four caucuses work through the different points in each of our bills and try to bring them together. The goal is throughout this process, as we get inputs from everyone in both caucuses, that we have a wonderful finished product that we can bring to both floors at some point, hopefully soon, hopefully fairly soon, or within the next month or so. So that's the process, and I think maybe we can open it up with the amendments and have good discussion about the details of the bill at that point. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Anderson. And what I would like to do is take public testimony, then close testimony, then take amendments, and then take the DE2, and then get you on your way. So is there anyone who wishes to testify to the bill here? We first have Mr. Bruce. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and present your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. For the record, my name is Devin Bruce. I am the Director of Legislative and Political Affairs for the Minnesota Association of Professional Employees, MAPE. We're a union of over 18,500 state employees across all boards, agencies, commissions, including representing the OIG staff across those agencies. I first want to thank the bill author for some of the changes made to the Office of Grants Management made in the last committee. I think there was quite a bit of misunderstanding on what they actually do, and the 4 staff that we currently have in there, and growing almost every year to try and help manage some of the vast amount of grants and money that is going out the doors is greatly needed and greatly appreciated. However, currently under the DE 2 amendments, we still have significant concerns. I mentioned this last time in the State Government Finance Committee, that instead of proposing more robust support for the OIG, what this bill does instead is to transfer core functions of the executive branch authority for oversight and enforcement to a new legislative agency, and in the process it strips away essential worker protections and safeguards that ensure employees who are performing this work are protected from arbitrary and politically motivated dismissals, similarly to what we are seeing at the federal level at Schedule F changes. And whether this is intentional or not, the provisions in this bill pushing staff into unclassified service is reflective of a broader attack on qualified government workers to make it easier to replace them with political appointees. For those who are unfamiliar with Minnesota's civil service system, is the difference between classified and unclassified service essentially boils down to the procedures and rights regarding hiring and firing. Classified employees are hired through a merit-based competitive selection process and can only be fired for just cause. Classified employees covered by collective bargaining agreements, such as the ones being declassified here, offer even greater protections for access to due process as well as notification. Unclassified employees, however, are typically, or unclassified positions are typically reserved for employees whose jobs require some duty of loyalty or confidentiality to either agency heads or other political appointees. The language in this bill in the DE2, stripping OIG employees of their classified service designation and union protections is antithetical into creating a qualified independent Office of Inspector General. Furthermore, in the new DE2, Section 7, Subdivision 3 gives broader protections against removal to the OIG and their deputies than what is actually provided to the other employees in the office. Beyond removing merit-based competitive hiring processes and protections from these positions, the bill will only make grants management and oversight far more difficult, and will only be that are currently in different agencies, but in different branches of government. As Commissioner Campbell in her letter highlights, there's tremendous amount of interdepartmental and interagency communication and collaboration that are needed to oversee these grants. From licensing to investigation that simply embedding legislative employees cannot resolve. Lastly, the bill attempts to consolidate functions of OIG by eliminating OIG offices across several agencies, yet eliminating DHS OIG entirely would functionally impair the state oversight to the areas where historically are most susceptible to fraud, which is the Medicaid program. CMS only authorizes DHS as the agency to administer and oversee Medicaid, and this bill cannot alter this, a lesson that we were learning quite well when we were breaking apart some of the agencies to create DCYF. This bill also does not address how the duplication of investigative authority for the Medicaid programs would interact not only between DHS and OIG, but also the Office of the Attorney General and Medicaid Fraud Unit. Also not in this bill is the transfer authority for DPS, which recently had an addition from the Commerce Department for their fraud investigative unit. House File 1 is a missed opportunity to discuss serious alternative plans to the governor's proposal, and it instead cobbles together a bunch of mismatched pieces for OIG and strips people of their protections of civil service that ensure that they are doing impartial and work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bruce. That concludes the number of testifiers that we had listed. Is there anyone else that wishes to testify in House File 1? No one's making a move, so we'll close public testimony. Representative Anderson, did you want to respond to public testimony before we move into amendments?
I think one of the amendments is about what he's testified to.
Okay,
Do it,
so
yeah.
you can save that for then. All right. Then the first amendment that I have up here is the A7 amendment. Representative Frederick, would you like to move the A7 amendment?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair.
All right, Representative Frederick moves the A7 amendment. Representative Frederick,
Mr. Chair,
Representative Knorr.
do we need to adopt the DE2 to put
Yeah.
the bill on the shape the author wants, and then the DE2, and then we go to the
And then
amendment?
amend the DE2. We were discussing that earlier, and I'm the wrong one in all of this.
No, you're not wrong. It's early in the morning.
So, members, we will pull back the A7 motion, since it was out of order, and move to the DE2 amendment. Are there any questions on the DE2 before we go to a vote? Okay, then I will renew my motion for the DE2 amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. The DE2 amendment is adopted. Representative Frederick moves the A7 amendment. Representative Frederick, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The A7 amendment is looking to address some of the things that we just talked about. I don't know if I didn't get a chance to talk with the bill author about the intention behind the DE2 amendment, if it is the bill author's intention to have the employees to be unclassified or not, but the A7 amendment looks to delete some of the language in there to make the employees in this new office to be classified employees to give some of the protections that we just talked about.
Thank you, Representative Frederick. Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Representative Frederick and Chair Schumacher. The intent is to completely mimic the office of the legislative auditor. The legislative auditor's office, which has functioned for decades without any problems and completely nonpartisan, completely no employee issues, nothing political. Those employees are generally unclassified. They're in the commissioner's plan. And so it is not, this was by design to mimic this office. It hasn't been an issue at all. And I think, that's why we're doing it. And that's why I don't support the amendment. Thanks.
Discussion to the A7 amendment. Representative Frederick?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that it's important to note that these employees that are currently doing this work are classified employees, and so it is a change from the work that they are currently doing. I think that we want loyalty to the state of Minnesota, to the duties that they are performing, not to any certain person that appointed them into that spot. And so I would ask that the committee adopt this amendment to ensure that the work remains focused on Minnesota. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Frederick. Final word, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Representative Frederick and Chair Schumacher. I would very much argue that the employees at the Office of the Legislative Auditor are very loyal to the state of Minnesota and have zero politics. There's been zero politics in that office, and that's very, very important. So, thanks.
With that, Representative Frederick renews his motion for the A7 amendment. All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. No. The A7 amendment is not adopted. Next, Representative Knorr with the A9 amendment. Representative Knorr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Anderson, thank you so much. The issue that you're carrying here is completely nonpartisan, as you stated. There's no amount of fraud, waste, and abuse that is acceptable.
Right, thank you.
And quite frankly, we are responsible to making sure that our programs, the grants that we issue, really reach those who need it the most.
Right.
And we are taking away from those when somebody commits fraud, waste, and abuse.
Yeah.
But then I wanted to put on a different hat. I may have visited some of your states in the previous years when I used to work for the Department of Human Services. Part of my task was to review the program integrity, particularly in the program of SNAP program. And I'm proud of the work that men and women who are working for the state every single day to make sure that we protect the taxpayers' dollars. And if you look at that program, I don't know if you had a chance to look into how the USDA really looks into how they pay for the funds that go into the program integrity when it comes to the SNAP. Have you had a chance to look into the program requirements?
Representative Anderson.
Representative Noor, no, I have not looked into the program requirements, the SNAP specifically.
Thank you, Mr.
Representative
Chair.
Noor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this office is going to take away the role of the program integrity from the Department of Human Services. Representative Anderson, have you looked into the Medicaid fraud, how it's conducted in the state of Minnesota?
Representative Anderson.
Yeah, Representative Noor, and yes, and maybe I can discuss what we're thinking as we evolve through this process. There are, in some of these agencies, there are things that are being done through technically through the OIG offices that need to probably stay within the agencies. We are aware of that. And there's those potentially sort of things that you're talking about. And as we work as a task force to figure out exactly those specific things, and some of them are line, what I would call the line staff that's doing things, those will be probably left within some of the agencies. So there are little things that are done that don't need to be rise to the level of the OIG with the separate agency. And I think that's where you're going with this. So I want you to know that we're aware of that, and we would love to have you join our group and help us work through those things as we do that through the agencies.
Representative Noor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's the impetus of this amendment that you have, the N9, because some of the programs that run through the agency, it's a requirement from the federal government. Whether it's the SNAP program that I just talked about, so that the programs that I used to go to many counties to ensure that we have program integrity when it comes to that. In fact, I'm proud of the work that the state of Minnesota is doing. You should take a look at the SNAP error rate across the country and see where Minnesota is. We're doing a good job, but we're not doing the work that is needed to eliminate completely any errors that are happening, overpayment, underpayment, agency errors, system errors. There's so many things that can be done to improve the work that we do. If you look also at the Medicaid, in holistic process, whether it's childcare, Medicaid, or even SNAP program, MFIP program, all those things, there's also a requirement of element of licensing for the program providers. And that goes through the agency that is responsible for that. As a state of Minnesota, we are state administered, we are state supervised, county administered. We're one of 10 states that do that. So that puts more responsibility on the agency. When you look at the requirement under the CMS, it requires the state agency to be responsible for the work of program integrity. And quite frankly, this bill takes away that responsibility and puts the burden on the state of Minnesota. Some of the funding that we get pays for the employees who work for the agency. My payment was coming 100% from the federal government and nothing from the state of Minnesota, because it's part of the work that we did at the state when I worked under the program integrity. When you look at the Attorney General's responsibility for the Medicaid fraud unit, MFUCU, that they have, it's 75% paid by the federal government, 25% by the state of Minnesota. So we're taking that one even away from them because that's their responsibility. That's their jurisdiction when it comes to fraud, waste, and abuse, because they can prosecute the cases. They can take over the case from the agencies and pursue the prosecution of those individuals who are committing fraud, waste, and abuse. So I think we need to be more cognizant of the environment that we're in to be able to achieve the goals we are interested in. So with that, I just wanted to make sure that DHS and some of their programs, because of the federal rules and the federal requirement for us to continue to do that work, we may be able to merge the two, but we can't take away the responsibility from the agency and put it in a different setting and the legislative authority, because this is the executive branch. They're responsible of delivering that. So we should keep it to them so we can continue to function to protect the tax dollars for the state of Minnesota and the federal government.
Thank you, Representative Noor. Any further discussion before I go to final word from Representative Anderson? Seeing none, Representative Noor?
Mr. Chair, I think I wanted to make sure that we put the agency on the record. I think we all have the letter that we got from the Department of Human Services. If they wanted just to briefly talk about some of the challenges that I addressed.
Thank you. Does anyone from the department wish to speak to this amendment? Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and present your testimony.
Mr. Chair, members, I'm Christy Rum with the Department of Human Services. We would generally support this amendment. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, questions for the testifier for the department, Representative Hicks.
I'm not sure if it's for the department or for the bill author or for Representative Noor. To be frank, I don't actually know who I'm asking. But given what Representative Noor explained and what I understand about our federal funding, and there isn't currently a fiscal, so my brain is just spinning a little bit. If we moved everything to this new office, then DHS would lose funding, right? Is that correct? Am I
Director
getting
Grum?
that? Well, I'm looking at everybody, I'm sorry. Like, I'm not sure who to ask.
Any one of us can.
Representative Anderson.
It depends on what part is specifically moved, because the OIG the bill proposes to essentially embed, they would be part of the OIG, but they would embed, we call it, assistant OIG staff within agencies, including this one. But there are functions that are currently done under the DHS OIG that probably could stay in, within the department. But the actual OIG within DHS would be moved to this new statewide OIG. So that's and regarding the specific dollars, that's being worked out. All the agencies are working on fiscal notes right now, and I think there's 20 different agencies that are looking at things. Does that answer the question? It doesn't give you a direct, because we don't have the numbers from the agencies yet.
Representative Noor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think with the DE, as you can see, takes away that funding because we're shifting everything to the Office of Inspector General. So that means any federal funds, whether partial or complete payment, the DE, by moving the function of the Department of Human Services, Program Integrity Licensing, and everything investigation, we have lost the funding that we're getting from the federal government because we're moving from a state agency to legislative branch when we put it under the the way it's drafted under the DE too.
Representative Hicks.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. So that's concerning to me because I feel like we're already trying to pick up crumbs all over the floor to save programs for people with disabilities and seniors. And if we're going to lose funding, that is something that is very, very concerning. We know that our population is aging. We know that 49% of seniors receiving long-term care are receiving it under the CADI or the DD waiver, and the other 51 are on an EW waiver. And I'm just very concerned if we do anything that's going to take federal funds away from people with disabilities and seniors, we have failed our most vulnerable.
Thank you, Representative Hicks. Any other questions for the department? All right. Thank you for your testimony today. Any other discussion on the A9 amendment before I give Representative Anderson final word? Seeing none, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I disagree with where the assumptions that were made, that this pulls everything out and every bit of staff, every bit of funding out of DHS. That is not the intent of the bill, either to pull to pull 500 employees out of DHS and put them in an Office of Inspector General. And if that is not at all the intent of this bill. We understand that there are things that have to remain, that don't rise to the level of what an OIG does, that need to remain within, not just DHS, but all the agencies. There are people in DEED that do certain things. There are people in MDE that do certain things. So we understand that, and that's not the intent. And again, if you're interested in getting involved with us, that would be fantastic as we work through this on the agencies, but that is not the intent. And Representative Hicks, it is the goal of the members that are working on this bill, and I think every member in this legislature, to make sure that every dollar that we have, state dollars, go to the citizens that are eligible for these programs. We are in a tough situation budget-wise right now, and we can't afford to have a single dollar going to fraud or waste anywhere within the state. So I ask that you don't support the amendment, but we will certainly take your comments in place and would ask you to join us if you'd like, so that you're comfortable with the bill. We want everyone in the end to be comfortable with the bill. So.
All right, Representative Hicks, was it to this point, or did you want to just talk on the bill? Okay, Representative Hicks.
I am so sorry. I read, maybe I read it wrong. I was very tired. 17.11 says that it will abolish, effective the day, from Human Services, Children, Youth, and Families. So when you say that's not the intent, help me understand how abolish and not the intent go together, because it's confusing, because it says it will be abolished.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Representative Hitt. It will abolish the OIG within the department. It will abolish, but we're talking about two different things. We're talking about the OIG, which has functions, and we're talking about also probably hundreds of employees within DHS who may do some things that are not OIG related. Does that make sense? So we're talking about abolishing, but they may or may not be underneath that OIG within DHS. There's 6 OIGs across, 6 or 7 across the different state agencies. But there are functions that are done by employees that don't need to answer to an OIG that's within the agency. Does that make sense?
Representative Hicks.
It does, but the federal language requires the oversight to be embedded within the department. So if you're abolishing the OIG in the department and moving it somewhere else, then we lose the federal funds for the Medicaid oversight. But the other people can't do it because they're not OIG. They're like policy leads, and policy leads have no authority to do anything. So if a policy lead, for example, has concerns about an organization and thinks that they're committing Medicaid fraud, they make a complaint, or they file a report with the OIG, and the OIG goes out and does the auditing of the provider to determine if there was waste, fraud, or abuse, and then does whatever they need to do as far as referrals and whatever. So the other people you're talking about are policy leads, they're clinical leads, they're all of those folks. They don't have any investigative authority.
Right.
And but the federal dollars are linked to the investigative authority piece. So if all the people who have investigative authority move out of DHS, then the federal match disappears.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Representative Hicks. This bill provides that the OIG will have embedded assistant, essentially staff, OIG staff within the agencies. But they will answer to the OIG, the statewide, essentially, OIG that's being set up. Rather than right now, we have little OIG agencies or that are independent, that are executive-appointed positions, political positions, essentially, that are within the agencies, that are essentially overseeing, they are overseeing themselves. They are, at the way it's set up, they are not independent. They are not truly independent of those that they oversee. And we want to create this independence, because something has to be done. It has not worked. We have seen the biggest fraud in any state in this country. And a lot of it is within these departments. And it hasn't functioned. And it's in program after program after program. I'm sure that you follow, as many of us do, the Human Services Employee Twitter account, which is supposedly like 500 people. And they're all people that you're talking about. They're employees who have worked for years, decades, for the state of Minnesota, trying to provide services to the people that we need to serve. And they have been incredibly frustrated over the last several years because they report it, nothing happens. Nothing happens. In fact, they talk about retaliation. I don't know if that's occurring, but nothing happens. And then we see hundreds of millions of dollars in fraud, in our dollars that should be going to people in need. It's not working. So, right. But there is absolutely no intent and this bill does not do anything that will jeopardize Medicaid, and we'll make sure that it doesn't, because that's like crazy. So, yeah.
Representative Hicks.
Thank you for that. And I don't disagree that there's, concerns. And I agree, this needs to be handled. I just worry because when we start talking about federal funds and all of the rules that are in there, I want to make sure that this fiscal, whatever comes down in this fiscal, takes into account all of those interactions and we don't make a mistake. Because if we have the wrong word and we make a mistake and we lose 75% of the money that we use to fund oversight, we will be back here next year trying to fix it, but it'll be too late. We will have already lost the funding. So I really, that fiscal needs, when that's happening, we need to be 100% sure that we are not accidentally cutting ourselves off at the knees.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you. And Representative, I absolutely agree with you. And I can tell you that is why this bill, which was, drafted a month ago, has gone through changes, because we're not going to propose something that doesn't make sense, that doesn't take into account all of these things that have been brought up with committees. We want this is good. Our attempt is to create good government and something that really functions for the future. And so thank you for your comments. I'm in complete agreement with you.
Representative Frederick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm still going to go back to page 17, line 11, talking about how it eliminates duties abolished, right? And so I understand what you're describing, that there's this body within DHS that's moving to this, what you're trying to develop within the legislative branch, but then they're still going to have investigator powers within the agency in a way. But I still think that to get those access to those federal dollars, you still need that department within DHS and that executive branch. It has to live within the executive branch. So I guess my question, Mr. Chair, is that if we could have nonpartisan staff, if their understanding of the language that exists in the bill, if they believe that it would impact any of our federal funding as it's worded right now.
Thank you, Representative Frederick. And I note the nonpartisan staff that worked on helping draft this bill are working in another committee at the moment. I don't know if Ms. Sunderman would be able to answer in the way, but Ms. Sunderman.
Mr. Chair, members, on this, I would defer to DHS to weigh in on whether this would impact their federal funding. Based on the letter from DHS, they seem to believe it would, but I would defer to DHS on this one.
Representative Frederick.
Mr. Chair, I mean, could we have somebody from DHS to come up and state whether or not that they believe the language that is in this bill currently would impact federal funding? And if they know, I mean, if there's even a number that they could throw at us, I would appreciate.
Director Bailey, welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself and give us your answer.
Thank you, Chair Schumacher and representatives. My name is Elise Bailey, Budget Director of the Department of Human Services. It is our understanding that as the state's Medicaid agency, we have requirements under federal laws and rules around ensuring program integrity of the program. So that is one piece where it's our understanding that we hold that responsibility as the state's single Medicaid agency. From a staffing perspective, if some of our staff were to move to another agency, we also pull down a 32% federal match for all of our admin. And so if staff were to move, that 32% match would not be put into the general fund, and it would essentially cost more for the same staffing that would exist in another entity.
Representative Frederick.
I mean, I think this is clearly an issue that we're having a disagreement on, because what I'm hearing from the bill authors is that this isn't going to cost the state any money, yet from my reading of the bill text, it very clearly will. We have the department here saying that it will. And I think that we shouldn't be advancing legislation if we don't even know the impact of it, especially within the human services space. Like, how much is it going to impact us, right? And so it's concerning for me that we are going to have, I mean, if we want to talk about fraud, waste, abuse, we want to hold people accountable. We don't want to misuse taxpayer dollars, but then this bill will do the opposite, right? It will reduce our capacity, because unless there's going to be money coming from who knows where to be able to fund these positions in this new agency that we're looking to create, we're not going to accomplish the goals that the bill author is looking to accomplish. So I don't support this bill as it exists for that reason. There's clearly not been enough work to iron out the details or the language within the bill, and I would ask the committee to vote no on the bill.
Thank you, Representative Frederick. Representative Noor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Given that this is conversation about the funding that we will definitely lose, I just wanted to check with the nonpartisan staff fiscal analyst. Whenever we develop human services bill, do we usually get the FFP to make sure that we're pulling in federal funds?
Mr. Harney.
Mr. Chair, Representative Noor, generally fiscal notes book the FFP net on the legislation.
Representative Noor.
That's correct. For every resource that we spend within the human services, there's the federal funding, the FFP, that comes along with it. It's millions of dollars that we pull in from the federal funds to make sure that we are really making sure there's a program integrity and everything else. To that, Mr. Chair, are we going to get a fiscal note? And is this bill coming back to this jurisdiction so we can look at the fiscal note of how much will be shifted to the state rather than pulling in resources from the federal government?
And Representative Noor, my understanding is that a fiscal note was requested for the DE2 yesterday, and so we're pending on that. Depending on what that looks like, it may need to, those implications may need to come back to us at that point. Representative Vernig.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Anderson. I have a question, and it sort of goes along with this. Is this modeled after any other state's Inspector General office? And if so, has that impacted their federal funding that you're aware of?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Representative Vergy. We actually have met with other states' Inspector Generals. We've talked to the association. There are numerous different ways that they're laid out. This isn't like any one specifically. It's actually, there's even, I mean, they do it all, every state's different. So it's modeled really for what we think works, in talking to the Inspector Generals across the country, or some Inspector Generals in their association. And it's also modeled under the way we do the Legislative Audit Commission, because that works here. So.
Representative Vernig.
Just a follow-up to that. So you did speak to other folks. Are there any other state or federal inspector generals that are appointed by the legislature?
Representative Anderson.
I believe so. I don't remember the numbers. So some are by bodies, some are by the governor. So it's a mix. Yep, thanks.
Representative Vernig. Representative Karen.
Thank you, Chair. And just, going back, I know we're discussing the A9 amendment, and I echo concerns when we're talking about, in this committee, it seems we have full agreement, right, where the governor's budget proposal has cuts in this field that are just untenable. We already don't have enough funding as it is to provide services for the people who need it, simply to survive, let alone thrive, right? Like, we're still struggling to have people thrive. I'm really having a hard time moving forward with the bill with so many questions about whether we might lose federal funding, which is huge. If we were to lose this funding, it would be just absolutely disastrous. We would be digging out of a huge hole. And so I can't emphasize enough how important it is that we all vote yes on this A9. And hopefully, we're talking about shaping this bill so that it's better moving forward. It's my understanding we do that in committee, and I think we do that by voting yes on the A9. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Karen. Final word on this amendment, Representative Anderson.
I think you know me. There will not be a final House File 1 that loses $1 of federal funds, because that is not fiscally responsible to the states, to this committee, and to the people that we serve. So that will not be the case. I don't believe that this language does that, but I believe that there are discussions that we will continue to have as we've all worked through this, not all 4 caucuses, as we've been working through this bill. Whether it has to come back, I don't know, to this committee, but I ask that we don't essentially throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is what this amendment does. It throws the entire section of the OIG issue within Human Services out of the bill, and I think that's a mistake. That's not the way we're going, either in the House bill or the Senate bill. And so I ask that you don't support the amendment, but that Representative Knorr or any others that are interested work with us as other legislators have done. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Anderson. Representative Knorr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this bill needs a lot of work within this jurisdiction, so I request a roll call to make sure that the bill meets its purpose. So I'm
Thank
requesting
you.
a roll call on this amendment.
Representative Knorr, the A9 amendment will have a roll call, and the Committee Legislative Assistant will take the roll.
Chair Schumacher,
Schumacher, no.
Vice Chair Gilman. Representative Knorr,
No, aye.
Representative Keeler,
Keeler, aye.
Representative Backer.
No.
Representative Curran,
Aye.
Representative Fischer,
Fischer, aye.
Representative Franzen,
Franson, no. Oh, Franson, yes. Sorry. Franson, yeah. No. I'm just trying to be bipartisan here, okay? Franson, no.
Representative Frederick,
Frederick, aye.
Representative Gander,
Gander, no.
Representative Gordon,
Gordon, no.
Representative Hicks,
Hicks, aye.
Representative Hiltzley,
Mamanya Hiltzley, aye.
Representative Jacob, Representative Knudsen,
No.
Representative Murphy,
No.
Representative Norris.
Aye.
There being 8 ayes and 9 nays, the A9 amendment is not adopted. To the DE2 amendment, or to House File 1 as amended. Representative Norris.
Thank you, Chair Schumacher, and thank you, Representative Anderson. Appreciate you bringing this bill forward. As you mentioned, I also appreciate the collaboration we've had on this bill so far. I look forward to further collaboration, trying to find an agreement that all 4 caucuses can agree to. I think, from our caucus perspective, we agree with you on the importance, and I personally agree on the importance of good governance and identifying and investigating every instance of suspected fraud, and also taking the proactive steps that we need to in order to prevent fraud from taking place in the first place in our state government agencies and the people who rely on those state funds. Our caucus does have some concerns with the bill as currently constructed. I think you've seen that in some of the amendments we've brought forward, some of the questions that we have, but it's been a very collaborative process so far, and I count on that continuing and hope we can get this bill to a form where everybody, all 4 caucuses, can enthusiastically support it in the end.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Norris. Representative Vernig.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Anderson. I have a few questions. So I was a former, I like where you're going with this for some of the components, obviously issues with others. Former investigator, I worked for the Department of Labor as an OSHA investigator for quite a few years. Do you know how many inspections, because you have a section here about unannounced monitoring visits, do you know how many of those would need to be done annually?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you. No, but because it's a huge number, obviously. So, but let me just tell you a couple stories. So you probably know I have a business, and I'm regulated by the state, by the Department of Cosmetology. So I own salons across the Twin Cities. And the department, of which we pay a fee for a couple $100 a year, shows up unannounced. And my staff says, the board's here, the board's. And that's good. And they do a report, and they look through things, and they write it, and we are always good, and they write a report. And that is an unannounced visit. And they're making sure that we're doing the right thing at any time and all time. And I think that if that would have been done, even a little, over the last 5 years, most of this fraud would not have occurred. We know that these departments did not go and look and see if meals were served to kids. We know they didn't go and look and see if daycare centers actually were serving children. We can go on and on and on of all the frauds. It would have been caught immediately with unannounced site visits. And it's not a huge expense because they do it to me, and I don't pay much for my license, and that covers the fees. So just show up once and see, and not announce, not say, well, we'll be there Tuesday the 28th, and then you can make sure you have the kids there eating a meal, right? So no, I'm sure it's a lot, and it should be a lot, but it's very simple to do.
Representative Vernig.
I really appreciate you bringing that perspective to it. I do have a few questions, but it will tie into what you just said. So one of the questions I have is, what happens if the grant has multiple entities, such as a coalition? Who gets inspected? Is it every entity or just the fiscal host?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you. I believe under this language, it would be the fiscal host, but that's essentially required. But it's up to the agent. If the agency wants to do more, that would be more than welcome. Because that's how we stop fraud in the state, is we actually go check and see if the businesses, individuals, nonprofits, whatever, it's a mix. If they're actually performing the services that you as legislators asked them to do, allocated the money, created the programs to provide services to people, see if they're actually being done.
Representative Vernig.
Yeah, so you mentioned the cosmetology or board inspection. Is this possible? because this is going to be huge, right? Like, we're a big geographic state. Couple of questions. One, do you see these being regional positions, or how does that look to you? And then could this inspection, because I don't really know what it looks like, right? The MPCA has a checklist, OSHA has a, these are the things that we're looking at. Could it be embedded in another inspection that may be happening concurrently? Such as like a nursing home inspection? How do you see that?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you. I think those are decisions that would be made by the agencies, but I can tell you there's salons in every corner of the state. Okay, and the board's not that big, and it gets done.
Representative Vernig.
Yeah, thank you. I agree, right? Because like, we're gonna have elevator inspectors out there and, things like that. So where we can, piggyback, it just seems unclear in here what that would look like. Also, this is a really weird question, but what if they refuse entry?
Representative Anderson.
Representative Berg, I don't have to think about that, so I can't imagine that they could refuse entry, so.
Representative Vernig.
Or they'd be.
Yeah, it was unclear in here, but in OSHA, there's a process and a procedure if they refuse entry, so I was just curious if you had thought about that or not.
Representative Anderson.
No, I haven't thought about that, so I guess an agency question, and if they can't do the inspection, then maybe they pull the grant fund. If there's that threat over their head, I don't think people are gonna refuse entry, so.
Great, thank you.
Representative Vernig. Representative Keeler.
Thank you, Chair. I want to ask a little bit more about the site visits as well, because especially in the work that we've done, I know that we've put a lot of grants out across the state, and I do know that there's like 1,500-ish grants. You said you didn't know, and I think maybe it would be good for you to know.
Representative Anderson.
Yeah, thank you. The question was how many site visits would there be? Not how many state grants are given.
Representative Keeler.
Thank you. Well, on here it says that there would be unannounced monitoring for any grants over 250,000. So it is kind of asking how many grants there are, because if you're doing site visits based on grants, it would be good to know how many grants they have. So I guess then I'll ask, do you know how many grants they have, or other agencies that you're pulling in here? Do you know how many total grants there are that we would have to do these unannounced monitoring visits on? Like, you already know what agencies you're pulling. You already know what grants they have. How many total grants are we talking about in line item 1116 to 1117?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you. There were, I think, an average of $400 million a year in grants that were granted by this legislature or through the agencies. It's about $400 million worth of grants. It's a mix of, large grants and small grants. So.
Representative Keeler.
Thanks, Chair. That didn't really answer my question. That just tells how much we put out in the statute here. And it's saying that we would do visits, unannounced monitoring visits for any grant over 250,000. So I'm just trying to ask, do you know how many grants, not how much money we put out, but how many grants would we have that would align with what you're saying in this statute would require an unannounced monitoring visit?
Representative Anderson.
I don't know the number, and that will come in the fiscal notes. The agencies are working through this, and it will come in. But I can tell you, back to the salon example, it's probably 1/10 of the number of salons in the state of Minnesota.
Representative Keeler.
Could we have somebody from the agency come up and answer this question? Director Bailey, maybe? Yeah, thanks.
This chair.
Director Bailey.
Chair Schoenmaker, members. DHS currently has over 1,500 grants over $50,000 and over 1,000 grants over $250,000. So my understanding of the bill is that it would impact, so put that together, over 2,500 grants a year. In addition, it seems like the bill shifts funding from the agency to the Office of Inspector General. And so while we would need staffing to go to the unannounced visits, it seems by the bill would reduce the level of like administrative costs that we would need in order to actually effectuate those site visits.
Representative Keeler.
Thanks, Chair. So there was a statement made that you guys like aren't doing any visits right now. Are you doing site visits or are you doing visits to the grants right now? Can you tell us how that process is working within the agency now?
Director Bailey.
Chair Schomaker, Representative Keeler, my understanding is that OGM policy does require site visits, particularly for those over $250,000. I don't believe they're unannounced, and so they may be scheduled, which from a staffing perspective makes things more manageable from the agency's perspective since we have limited resources to do that. Beyond that, I have questions out to my staff on how many site visits we do and how this bill is different from what is under current practice.
Representative Keeler.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to figure out if we're moving something from one department to another, and we're saying it's an even wash, that there's like, I just kind of am trying to figure out how all of this maneuvers. So then the last question I have is, you mentioned when you were up last time that there's sometimes this 33% federal match. The individuals who are doing the site visits now in DHS, are they, when they're paid, does 33% of their FTE come from the federal drawdown?
Director Bailey.
Chair Schomaker, Representative Keeler, yes. So the agency has appropriated the full money for the salaries, and then we pull down a federal match of around 32%, and that federal match is deposited into the general fund. So yes, we would pull down that match for those staff.
Representative Keeler.
Okay, okay, so maybe really my last question. So just so that I understand, if those individuals moved over to said new entity, we would no longer have that 33% federal drawdown for the same staff that were doing the work in DHS over in the new agency. So really, the state would then have to come up with the 33% that we were getting from the feds to now pay the new growing government that we're providing.
Chair Schomaker, Representative Keeler,
Director Bailey.
if the bill required the grant staff to move, I'm not sure if that's what the bill requires. I think it requires us to do more, it has more requirements on the current staff at DHS.
So you would have to hire, sorry, Chair.
Yeah.
Representative Keeler.
Sorry.
Thanks, Chair. So you would have to hire more staff to do this, and that will be in the fiscal note then?
Director Bailey.
Chair Schomaker, Representative Keeler, yes, our fiscal note would assess, what are the current requirements we have now, and what does this bill add to that, and how many staff we need to meet that. And then going to the FFP question, we would assume a federal match if those staffing would be within our agency.
Representative Keeler.
Okay, sounds good. No more questions. Just want to make a statement that we already have grants that are going out to all of our communities for things that impact all of us. And what I don't want to happen is any delay in the money getting out the door to the grants or any pauses that our communities can't do these really critical services that we need. I understand the diligence that we're trying to do, but I want it to be real balanced with the ability to effectively get these grants out to all of our communities that are feeding and housing and supporting our most vulnerable individuals. So just want to keep that in mind, that we continue to work on that balance as well. Thank you.
Fischer.
Thank you, Chair Schumacher. Thank you, Representative Anderson. A couple of questions I have is in terms of the explicit payment withhold. As I was looking at lines 11.1A through 11.21, and I'm a little confused on the DE on that, because it does say that you can withhold funds if a progress report is not required, but what if there's something else that's found and you want to withhold funds? I don't know if that's clear enough to say that you can stop any kind of payment at any time. It doesn't feel explicit enough. And the reason I raise that is having run into some other agencies working with other issues is if we aren't explicit enough here, when it gets to a judge, the judge rules a different way. And that was the start of the feeding our future issue, is that the Judge Ritchie said the department did not have the right to withhold payments, was going to fine $10,000. And so that's why I'm asking that question, is to make sure that we're being explicit enough on how you can withhold the payments. And I think the language we have here does not accomplish that purpose. And that's why I want to ask your question, is Do you think it does or doesn't, or what do we need to do? Because it's just referring to submit a progress report. It doesn't say if we find other issues that would cause us to want to withhold payment.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Representative Fischer. I'm going to need to do more because I think there is, the intent, there is language that makes it that they can withhold payment for many other things. So I want to also just quickly, the Feeding Our Future, there's a question. The judge actually came out and said no, that they didn't do that, that they didn't say that they couldn't withhold payment later. So, but we're not going to get into that. So, but you know, we'll look at this language again with legal, because part of our for caucus, you know, meetings, we have nonpartisan staff, we bringing in legal staff. You know, we haven't done that yet besides the ones that have worked on the drafting of the bill. But we'll make sure, because it's our intent to make sure that we can stop fraud in its tracks.
Representative Fischer.
Thank you, and that's why I'm asking the question, because I very much appreciate that. Another question that I have is that how does this work with nonprofits that have multiple state grants? You know, do they get? And the reason I ask this is, having been a CFO in a nonprofit, you know, with multiple grants, you know, every couple of weeks another group is coming in to check on it. So, you know, at times that's all we have a couple of people doing is submitting stuff in for each state grant, because you've got different departments. Does this would this be something that they could consolidate together, or would an agency, if they've got multiple grants, have multiple stops throughout the entire year because they've got more than one grant?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you. That's a good question. And I don't know the answer. I would think that one inspection could cover. The part of the concept of consolidating the OIG is that agencies don't talk to each other right now at all. And we did have a discussion with the Office of Grants Management. They're looking at part of the legislation that was passed 2 years ago, gave them the dollars to do a study to look at statewide grants management system. They're just studying it. That nothing has been done beyond that. It turns out, though, that grants management office really just does more admin grants and writes a little, here's how to do it stuff. So they're not actually acting as an OIG or as a consolidator of what's going on, what's out there, right? Because there are numerous organizations that get grants from multiple agencies, and that's been a problem, big problem. And then we could have, in some cases, there's defrauding one agency, and we're giving them money over here, right? And that, you know, we have to talk to each other. Agencies have to talk, and they will do this. So I don't know the specific answer, whether they have 3 inspections or because they get 3 different state grants. I think that will be up to the OIG. A lot of this, and I know Representative Vernig had some questions about how exactly, we need to allow some of the management to exist within the new OIG and within these agencies. We shouldn't be dictating necessarily every little thing. That's their job to know how to do it best, or it should be their job. They should, so thank you.
Representative Fischer. Representative Hicks. Representative Knorr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a few questions. Section 11 of the bill talks about data practices that we're going to be looking into. Based on this process, some of the requirement by the federal government, we have to get authorization of how we share data. Have you looked into that? Because DHS is required to inform the federal government when there are issues of how you share data. Have you looked into that? Have you consulted with the agency to inquire about data sharing?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Chair Schumacher and Representative Knorr. There were a couple amendments that were pulled that had to do with data sharing too. And again, the legal staff is looking over this with an absolute fine-tooth comb. The goal is to allow agencies to share as much data as possible, obviously through the OIG and through potentially a grants management, which will be run under admin, but also to protect private data. So some of the amendments I actually argued were too open, that it didn't protect private data. So we have to find that balance, and obviously we have to comply with federal law as it relates to this department, and just general data practices, so.
Representative Noor.
Mr. Chair, I think as part of the requirement, it's really difficult to share data between agencies because of the federal requirement. So I think it also makes it difficult for some of the data sharing with the Inspector General, who is actually under the legislative branch rather than the agency. So, Mr. Chair, I've worked for the department. I used to upload all the data that we got from the federal government into the system. There are specific requirements that we have to meet in terms of who has got access, what are they doing with the data, and all those things. Specific requirements to restrict the access of that data. And so we have to follow the law based on the requirement from the CMS and also other requirements. So the other question I have, Mr. Chair, is I've had multiple times, it's also included in the bill, that they'll be embedded in the agency. Will there be memorandum of understanding for anyone who's going to be working with that agency?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, and Representative Noor, I'm sure that there would be. Part of the, again, concept of this is that, is the data issue. So an OIG, a statewide OIG, would actually have all the data from every agency. So they would know right away if there's a problem in labor, okay? They would know that without having to essentially worry about the fact that labor maybe can't talk to MD, can't talk to, so this is part of the whole logic behind doing this on a statewide level also.
Representative Noor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that's why we have firewalls in terms of who gets to access that data, and it's restricted within that agency. So this bill does not meet that test at this point. And then when you look at the data practices, we're also going to be collecting data from businesses, not only nonprofits. Businesses have got some additional protections. And so how are we going to look into the businesses who are getting state grants, state funding for some of the work that they do?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you. Any recipient of a state grant, whether it's a business or a nonprofit, more are nonprofits, but some are businesses. There would be the same requirements on both. So that the same requirements that for data, if needed, by the OIG, the same requirements on site visits. But that's part of accepting a grant. If a nonprofit or business accepts a grant and provides the services, that's part of it.
Representative Noor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So are we going to negate what we created last, in terms of legislative process, because we're the legislators and we have to look into all the parameters? Section 16B.981, it's not in the bill because it's taking away that authority that we created last year in how we do grants management, requiring financial audit, giving the agencies the 10% or 5%, depending on which type of a grant it is. That whole section of 16B.981, which stipulates from who gets the grant, whether it's 50,000 or above, we created a process where the grants, we have to manage the grants through that lens of guidance that we've given the agencies. So will this bill negate all the work that we did in the last session? Because it looks like if we put it under Inspector General, the funds that they're pulling in as administrative funds, will that be a shared resources, or are we going to be carving out some of the funds that come along with the 10% administrative fee on a grant or even a program administration? Are we going to carve out that funding for the Inspector General's office?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Representative North and Chair Schumacher. It does not negate what we did at all, and but to the question of carve out, it does. So right now, the agencies can take between, I think it's 5 and 10% of a grant. That was new, and that was new because the agencies said they need, because there's been so many grants, statewide grant, they need some dollars for oversight, and I agree with them, and I think I said that 2 years ago. They need those dollars, but they have an option. It's a 5 to 10% And I don't know what they did last year, what percent they took. This does give 1% of that to the OIG of the grant dollars for oversight. But it leaves the rest of it within the agencies.
Representative Noor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In order to become more effective and to run efficiency within the government, we need the technology to support it. Does this bill contain the resources needed to improve the state agencies' systems, the computer systems that we're using? It's a 40-year-old system. In order to become more effective, we also need to have those tools. Does this bill provide the tools necessary to become more effective?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you. Representative Noor, I go back to what was passed 2 years ago for the Office of Grants Management within the Department of Administration. We gave, I think it was about $1.5 million to do a study to look at a statewide grant system to provide those tools that you're talking about. We had them before the Fraud Committee, I think it was Monday. Boy, it's every day. Seems like a long time ago, but I think it was 3 days ago. And they said that they are doing the study and that they should have that within the next month or two as to the viability and the cost of creating that statewide grant system that does exactly what you're talking about.
Representative Noor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm also talking about the systems that are run through the agency. I'll give you an example. We've heard about SSIS, but Maxis is the main engine. It's more than 40-year-old. It's going to cost us a lot of money. Are you willing to put the resources necessary to improve how the agencies are running their systems? I can give you an example after the other. There's PRISM, MMIS. All those systems are right now taking a lot of resources and not providing the outcome that we're looking for. So if there's an error in that system, there'll be overpayments. And there'll be errors which could create fraud, waste, and abuse. Are we going to put that resources? The agencies need the tools in order to implement this requirement. Are we putting the resources needed so that those agencies function effectively?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Representative Noor. That is a whole nother can of worms that I'm sure that State Gov will take a look at. And if there's bills out there to completely upgrade the state of Minnesota's computer systems, that's a separate issue than creating an OIG. And probably a huge cost at a time of limited resources.
Representative Noor.
And that's exactly what we need to do, because if we're not giving them the tools, we cannot just give them a hammer to break what is not functioning. So I think we need to look at the tools and look at other tools in the toolbox so we can fix those issues so we can be able to function better rather than having a hammer when it comes to addressing these issues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Noor. Representative Frederick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When we were having the discussion about the A7 amendment about classified employees versus unclassified employees, one of the comments that you made, Representative Anderson, was that the intention of the DE2 is to mimic the Office of the Legislative Auditor when it comes to their employees. And that you said the majority of their employees or all of their employees are not classified employees. And so my question then is on page 9.
Yeah.
When your bill talks about the classified employees of the Office of the Legislative Auditor, why then would when your own words is that you're trying to mimic that language, and then my amendment would have mimicked the Office of Legislative Auditor, your DE2 then does the opposite of what you said? I guess I'm trying to understand that.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you. Representative Frederick, I'm not sure what you're, you said page 9?
Representative Frederick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Page 9, line 29, the classified employees in the Office of the Legislative Auditor. And then on page 10, line 1, it talks about conditions of employment for employees of the Office of the Inspector General, the new office that you're creating. And so that amendment would have had that language mimic the language that you already have on page 9. So if you're telling me that you want to have this office that you're creating mirror or mimic in a way the Office of the Legislative Auditor, your own bill acknowledges that the employees in the Office of the Legislative Auditor are classified employees. Your bill says that, but then when you're creating the office for this new office, or creating a language for this new office, you're removing that language. So I'm just trying to understand, when you say you want it to be similar to the Office of the Legislative Auditor, but then your bill does not. Like, you're saying one thing, but then your bill does the other. And I'm just trying to like figure out how those things fit together.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Representative Frederick. I wish I had the exact breakdown of the legislative auditor. I mean, most of the employees are in the commissioner's plan. I think she actually spoke at the last hearing about this, and it wasn't clear. Some may be in the classified service, but not all at all. And I think most are not. So we can find out exactly, but certainly not all. And yours creates a situation where all are in the classified service. This will be, there's no intent at all to unclassify people for a reason or anything. And I think that's where MAPE is going and asked me, and there's no intent to do that. The intent is to, like I said, mimic it. Most are unclassified, I believe, in the Office of the Legislative Auditor. But if there are some classified, I know when I was, just a different example, but when I served as state auditor here, we had we had some classified and we had some unclassified. And most were in the commissioner's plan, but not, the retirement plan, but it was a mix. And so the intent is to do that. And we'll look at this language, we'll look at exactly what's there, but it's not going to be all classified employees. And it shouldn't be. They need to have independence.
Representative Frederick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So could you explain to me the language in your bill, though, then on line 9.29, where it talks about the classified employees of the legislative auditor? Because if what you're saying is that the majority of staff at the Office of Legislative Auditor are not classified employees, what does the language mean then in your bill on line 9.29?
Representative Anderson.
Uh, 9.29 is existing language within the statute.
Right.
Correct. But let's see, this is how we do. I have it classified. Yeah, I'm going to have to give you actually look at this and give you an answer why that is language in there. But most are not classified. I don't know if any are classified, but most are not.
Representative Frederick.
Thanks. This is existing statute.
Mr. Chair, thank you. There seems to be a lack of information or lack of knowledge about the bill. And I guess could we bring up Mr. Bruce from MAPE to talk about the employees that are in the Office of the Legislative Auditor, if they're classified versus unclassified, and what the impact would be in this bill with the DE2 amendment to the employees that work in those offices.
Mr. Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. So just for clarification, MAPE does not represent anybody at the Office of the Legislative Auditor. They are unrepresented employees. However, only the legislative auditor, the deputy secretaries, and the deputy auditors and the confidential secretaries are unclassified. The rest are in the classified service. There's a distinction between that I think that's really getting confused is whether or not they're covered in the plans of managerial or commissioner's plan. The commissioner's plan includes both classified and unclassified employees. It makes no distinction of whether or not they're in one branch or the other. It's about the level of confidentiality or duty of loyalty or other specified criteria in 43A.08 for unclassified service.
Representative Frederick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that this further illustrates that this bill is not even close to ready to even be passed to the next committee. When the language, whether we're talking about employees, when there's not an understanding of the impact that it has to the employees there, when there's not when this committee doesn't have an understanding of the cost, if there will be a cost, if there won't be a cost, will we lose federal funding? Because my understanding of the language that there is, we had the department come up saying that we will lose federal funding. When the overall bill is about trying to address fraud, but the impact of the bill is the opposite, where we will decrease our capacity to address fraud. And so even if it was cost neutral, the requirements of this bill require more site visits, we would need more staff. And so that even by that alone, we would need additional funding in this bill. When there's not a fiscal understanding, there's not even agreement on what the cost or whether or not we would lose federal dollars, this bill is not ready to move on. There's not even an understanding of the language that's currently in this bill as amended about its impact. So I don't see how we in good conscience can pass this bill out of this committee when it's very clearly been slapped together and there's not even an understanding of everything that it does. So I, again, would ask this committee to not vote this bill out because there's just a complete lack of understanding of anything that it does.
Thank you, Representative Frederick. Representative Vernig.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again. Sorry, I have more questions. And I want to thank Chair Knorr for asking about the technology. I'm a little bit of a geek on IT modernization piece, so I do think that that might be a concern. I'll be curious to see what their report comes up with. It's about resources, right? So I know we just talked about DHS inspections or potential, right? And you're coming to my other favorite committee, Ed Finance. And, we did an OIG last, funded it the first half of the biennium, so there'll be more inspections, not just from DHS. So I think there's going to be a lot of people needed to do that. I just want to, and I don't, sorry, this isn't a real question, I guess, but I would encourage you to look at Minnesota Statute 182-659, and that in your bill here, you have maybe 3 sentences about inspections. This is what they use for OSHA inspections, and these are just kind of the subdivisions. They give you the authority to inspect, the powers of the commissioner, aiding of inspection, request for inspection, reporting of violations, court orders for entrance and inspection, advance notice of inspection, saying, hey, you can't do this under most circumstances, and protection from subpoena. I know that you want to give a lot of authority to the department, but I do think having a framework of what that would look like would only benefit us in the long run. This is just one example. I'm sure that there are others. So I would just encourage you to look at that as you develop your bill further. I know, as we heard, we don't all think this is like prime time ready, and you've been very good about working to make it better. So that's just my encouragement for you. Thank you.
Representative Vernig. Representative Hicks.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry. I will be really quick. Under powers in section 9, 510 through 518, we have tens of thousands of people in this state that self-direct their Medicaid services. So they're on things like a CDCS, a consumer-directed support waiver, or they're now transitioning into CFSS, where the person is self-directing their services. Under this definition as it is written, and I would maybe need the department to tell me if I've misread, but I think that person's home would be considered the facility owned and operated by the recipient, which means based on the language between 510 and 518, as it is currently written, 510. I think these folks could go into anyone's individual home and do a site visit at any time if they self-directed their services. And I think 510, because we did not accept the DA that moves the Medicaid stuff out, I think 510 would give this department, as it is currently written, the names, birth dates, PMIs, and services of every Medicaid recipient who's receiving home and community-based services and self-directs. So that's like everybody's grandma who's getting PCA in their home. That's all the kids. Like, we may need to tighten this up if you're using, if DHS is staying in here and it's not coming out, and you're going into Medicaid data, this is really broad, because those people self-direct their services, so they are considered the recipient of, they self-direct their services, they hire their own staff, they do all of that, so they are the employer of record. And so the way that this is written, I think everyone on CDCS and CFSS would, under the, well, it would depend on the CFS model, but regardless, I think their homes would be open for inspection at any time.
Thank you, Representative Hicks. Representative Norris.
Thank you, Chair Schumacher. And I've got a question or a couple questions for the agency. I think probably Director Bailey might be the best fit. I'm trying to kind of understand the appropriate scope of this bill and the activities that should be looked at within the OIG, and specifically kind of in the DHS realm. And the bill as currently structured is very focused on grants. You mentioned earlier, I think that you said there were around slightly over 1,500 grants over $50,000. But when we're looking at public dollars that are leaving DHS, I'm guessing most of that is actually in the form of payments to providers rather than grants. And you probably don't have the numbers right at the tip of your tongue, but do you have a sense of 1,500 grants? How many providers does DHS currently work with? Is it even just kind of a ballpark number, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands?
Director Bailey.
Chair Schumacher, Representative Norris. Unfortunately, I don't have that number in front of me, so I can get that for the committee. But to your earlier kind of statement of, yes, about 89%, I think, of our budget is spent on MA alone. And so a lot of the duties of the Office of Inspector General are around Medicaid. So I think the scope of the bill would impact that amount of our budget, and only 3% is grants. But as you heard earlier, it's a lot of grants, and those were only the grants that were over the level that are cited in the bill.
Representative Norris.
Thank you, Chair Schumacher, and thank you, Director Bailey. And for those services to the providers, payments to providers, I'm guessing it might vary by program, but so there's these materiality thresholds in this bill for grants. Certain procedures for a grant over $50,000, certain procedures for a grant over $250,000. Are there similar levels within, or in terms of doing site visits to those providers for those waivered programs, and are there certain materiality thresholds in terms of dollar amounts that we see on that side?
Director Bailey.
Chair Schumacher, Representative Norris, I'd have to get back to you that. That's a great question. And it will depend on, our level of, okay, we oversee over 390,000 entities, live stream text. And it will depend, though, on the service. For example, home and community-based services are generally 245D licensed, and so that process is different than maybe an unlicensed service. So, but we can get you actual more detailed information, whether there's a dollar threshold.
Representative Norris.
Thank you, Chair Schumacher, and thank you, Director Bailey. I think that would be helpful as Representative Anderson and I try to work on refining this bill to get a little bit more detail on that, so that we can make sure that we're really focusing on the majority of the dollars that are going out the door at DHS, so we can make sure that we're identifying the greatest area of need in terms of identifying potential fraud.
Thank you, Representative Norris. Representative Knorr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you've heard, this bill is not ready. It's a great attempt. I agree with you with the intent of the bill. With that, Mr. Chair, I believe it should stay here until we fix everything that is needed within our jurisdiction. I request a roll call.
Roll call having been requested, there will be a roll call. Final word, Representative Anderson.
I just want to thank the committee. We're getting there, close. This is a work in progress. And as we know, all the very large bills, large programs that have come through here, at least in my time, have been a work in progress. And I'm going to, I think, 6 or 7 committees and getting different input from members on different areas, because this affects all of state government. And it's important that we work together, that we do this right. So I don't have the answers, and that's why I'm here, that's why I'm talking to you, that's why this bill is changing as we get more information. And so this is a good process, and I ask that you support the bill. I ask that you help work on the bill, all of us. Like I said, Representative Norris is there. I ask you, lead Nor, to consider working on the bill with us, because we've got to do this for Minnesota. We've got to stop the fraud, and we've got to get the dollars to the citizens that need them. So thank you.
With that, I will renew my motion that House File 1, as amended, be recommended to the Committee on Education Finance. A roll call having been requested, the Committee Legislative Assistant will take the roll.
Chair Schumacher,
Schumacher, aye.
Vice Chair Gilman, Representative Knorr,
No.
Representative Keeler,
Healer, no.
Representative Backer,
Aye.
Representative Curran,
No.
Representative Fischer,
Fisher, no.
Representative Franson,
Franson, yes.
Representative Frederick,
No.
Representative Gander,
Gander, aye.
Representative Gordon,
Gordon, aye.
Representative Hicks,
Hicks, no.
Representative Momanyi Hiltzley,
Moanyi Hiltzley, no.
Representative Jacob, Representative Knutson,
Yes.
Representative Murphy,
Yes.
Representative Norris,
No.
There being 9 ayes and 8 nays, House File 1, as amended, is re-referred to the Committee on Education, Finance, that one. Next, with the 10 minutes we have left, we have House File 98, Representative Fischer working with Representative Gilman. As they make their way to the table, they will move that, Representative Fischer will move that House File 98 be laid over for possible inclusion in future bill. When you're ready, Representative Fischer, Representative Gilman, you're.
Thank you, Chair Schumacher. We do have an author's amendment that Representative Gilman will take care of explaining and moving.
Thank you, Chair Schumacher and committee. Happy to be here today. All right, so the author's amendment, let's talk about that. The amendment includes some later changes and proponents that we negotiated with our partners in this bill, and some new technical assistance and other changes from conversations with DHS and bill authors. So here's some of the changes they include. Changes to case manager staff qualification requirements for adult and children targeted case management, TCM, by expanding eligible bachelor degree types, along with adding training and ways to demonstrate competency and to supplement the change. That's one thing. It also provides clear language of the staff types to be eligible for the team lead role for assertive community treatment, ACT, directly calling out licensed mental health professionals, clinical trainees, and mental health practitioners as eligible to be the team leads as opposed to the current statute language. This clarifies last year's statute changes. And also it deletes the sections of the bill adding texting as a billable modality for providing case management services. Makes language changes mutually agreed upon between the bill's proponents and DHS in sections 1, 3, and 5. Bill proponents and DHS are in ongoing discussions on the language for sections 2 and 6.
All right, with that, Representative Gilman moves the A2 amendment. Any discussion to the A2 amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of the A2 amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. The A2 amendment is adopted. To your bill as amended.
Thank you, Chair Schumacher and committee. It's a pleasure that I've been able to work with Representative Gilman and people from the Mental Health Legislative Network to put this bill together. As we are presenting this bill today, I want to remind people that today is Mental Health Day on the Hill, and a number of you will be having people visiting you from the different advocacy groups out there, so please make time to hear them, listen to them, because besides this bill here, there are a number of other bills that will be moving through the process that you want to make sure you get a better understanding of what they're going to do. This bill today is going to help build capacity in our mental health system by helping streamline the system, eliminating duplicates, items that are duplicative in here. The big challenges we have in the mental health area is that we don't have enough providers right now. And with the limited people that we have, we want to make sure that we give them the increased capacity so that where we need to have the accountability and paperwork, we can have that done, but at the same time, free them up from the other duties so that they can spend more time helping people who need the assistance. A couple of things that this will do is it expands the qualifications for people with bachelor's degrees. As long as they meet certain criteria, we expand out the criteria that they're expected to meet to make sure that we have competent people. We are also addressing the training for and continuing education for case managers. Typically, it's 40 hours annually. We would scale that down, that as people have more and more experience, that would eventually drop down to 20 hours in the fourth year. It would also slightly reduce the numbers of hours of supervision of case managers. And then also in terms of supervision of ACT teams, it would say that if there is a qualified member who is on the team, they don't need to have an additional separate supervisor who is already part of who is qualified to be on the team. So we're trying to eliminate some duplication that's occurring in the process there. We do have a testifier here, and I would like to be able to turn it over to them.
Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and present your testimony.
Sure. Chair and members of the committee, my name is Ellie Skelton. I'm the Executive Director at Touchstone Mental Health. I've been in the mental health field for the last 30 years. We provide intensive residential treatment services, case management, supportive housing services. We provide some waivered services for people on the CADI and EW waiver. We also do care coordination and behavioral health home services and adult rehab mental health services. I'm also the current president of the Mental Health Association Provider of Minnesota. I really appreciate your support on this bill. We're just looking to continue to update service regulations, allowing staff to spend more time with clients and less time on burdensome regulations. We aim to improve efficiency without additional costs. Also, pipeline, getting more people into the mental health field is a big push for us. One thing I often like to let people know is when I started in 1992 as a mental health worker at a rehab facility for adults with mental illness, my bachelor's degree was in English literature and women's study. And back then we could get variances. I had a lot of on-the-job training, supervision, on-call support, the same things we have available for our staff. As a new graduate from the University of Minnesota, I wasn't thinking about going into the behavioral health field, and here 30 years later, I'm still here. And I think those pathways to getting people involved in mental health, realizing it's empathy, it's learning about substance use disorder, learning about on the job, how do you help reduce crisis? You can read about that in a book, but until you're actually helping de-escalate someone and you're watching your coworkers de-escalate someone, really a lot of the community-based mental health work we do is around de-escalation, and you learn that on the job. And that's just what we want to do, is continue to make those pathways into the behavioral health field. We've already kind of gone over some of the key changes. Case management associates, those are folks that work alongside a case manager, helping do some of the, kind of like helping people get to the food shelf, helping people move, getting to housing appointments. Getting more case management associates in the field who then become target case management is a great way. And currently, it's really burdensome to do that, and so fixing some of that will make that a better pipeline into having more target case management across the state, because those positions are open across the state. The level of care assessments, we're just kind of aligning timelines. The client rights, we're actually just making that more simplified. There's two sets of client rights that we currently have to provide people, and they currently conflict with each other. Our overriding regulation is called 245I, and that has a lot of protections in it already. And so we're just pointing to 245I is where we're getting our treatment planning and discharge planning and saying those are the rights that people qualify for. It was just a little confusing in the current language. These changes may seem minor, but for frontline staff, they significantly impact daily workloads. Reducing unnecessary regulatory burdens allows mental health staff to focus on providing care, improve staff retention and client outcomes. We're trying to build a pipeline into the behavioral health field in this state. I urge your support for this bill and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Skelton, for your testimony. We also have testimony from a member on Zoom.
Hi, Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Ashley Chose. I am the CEO of Woodland Centers. We are a CCBHC that serves 7 rural counties in mid-central Minnesota. And we witness every day the challenges that House File 98 seeks to address. It introduces critical reforms that strengthen our mental health system, will expand the workforce capacity, enhance service accessibility, and streamline the mental health regulations, really ensuring that providers like Woodland Centers can focus on what matters most and on what we do best, which is patient care. So some of the examples in this bill are the adjustments to supervision requirements, which would allow us to hire and retain more qualified staff while continuing to maintain high quality care. As a provider of ACT services, I strongly support the bill's modifications to ACT team lead requirements. Recruiting professionals for rural ACT teams is very challenging, and these changes would provide much needed flexibility while continuing to maintain service quality. House File 98 represents a significant step forward to address the barriers to mental health services, and I really urge you to support House File 98 for the benefit of mental health providers and the thousands of Minnesotans that are relying on these services. So thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you for your testimony. With the minute left, does anyone else want to testify? See none, we'll close public testimony. Any discussion from members? Final words, Representative Gilman, Representative Fischer.
Thank you for the opportunity to present. I will say a big thank you to the department for working with the advocates to help put the bill together. There's still a little bit more work that we'll continue working on that Representative Gilman and I will do. Thank you and ask for your support.
Thank you. Anything, Representative Gilman?
Thank you. Appreciate your
All right.
support.
With that, Representative Fischer renews his motion to lay over House File 98. House File 98 is laid over. And with that, we are adjourned until Tuesday, February 25th at 8:15.